Good afternoon, everyone. Still alive, so I'm the last one. Hopefully, I'm not going to bore you to death right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Skybox security. Anyone in the room who knows Skybox already? Perfect. Hey. So I'm going to guide you through what we are doing, who we are, and why we're doing the things we're doing. So basically, we are not the new kid on the block. We're 16 years old, company out of the Silicon Valley. So there's the headquarters. The development is in Israel. We are probably one of the fast-growing companies in our space. 270 million in US dollars in funding since 2016. We have a 5-star review probably everywhere where we show up at the moment. 800 plus customers, 50 countries as verticals. I know it's even a little bit more with just one customer covering with Skybox in an MSSP project, roughly above 80 countries. So quite a large installation. So what are we doing? So we're here because we think that it is really critical for you to understand the battlefield you're in, right? I mean, and it is a battlefield, as you see. What's going on with the attacks today. And 90% of all of the attacks we see today could have been avoided by just using standard controls. It's an old saying. I'm saying it since probably 4 or 5 years right now. It's always in the Verizon data breach incident report. And it's still so much truth in it. Most of the mechanisms are not being used correctly because of a couple of factors. The complexity. So new data centers, hybrid networks, new regulation, changing threats. So people are more stucking into the day-to-day doing rather than they have time to educate themselves and follow up with the new attacks and the new attack landscape and how hackers approach their network. And then the manageability goes down because more and more vendors are coming into your network. You have more and more management systems. You have a limited visibility because they're all living in silos, right? No one shares the data. Limited stuff. Way too less people sitting in your environment and managing it. Operational silos, and then, of course, no actionable intelligence. I mean, by knowing that something is wrong in your network, necessarily doesn't insist that you know how to counter-measurement that. And that's where we try to help you out by doing this. So we think that currently there is a large gap between the security solutions you probably have in your network, which is the firewall, of course, the vulnerability scanner, the SIM solution. I worked in all verticals of this with previously companies. And I think there is a large gap because for the firewall, the intended goal is to what? To keep malicious traffic out of my infrastructure. Sounds easy. So why do I find every firewall kind of being freaked up when I do a POC? That we find always more unused rules and shadowed and redundant rules rather than rules that are really necessary on the firewalls? Why do we always find any rules? Because of the previously said. The stuff is heavily involved in day-to-day doing, and they're missing that. Vulnerability scanners, you identify, but you probably don't have the remediation options. For the SIM solution, I mean, I did 4 years selling SIM in the DACH region, and it's quite complicated. I mean, SIM can do everything for you, and literally is nothing doing out of the box, right? So what you don't tell the SIM to do, it will not do for you. And we try to close this gap by seeing the incidents here, the difficult to ensure security controls and match the policy. It's difficult to find any critical risks, among the volume of vulnerabilities. I released an RFI 8 days ago with a very large company in Germany. And they said, we probably have something between 20 and 30 critical vulnerabilities per server in our infrastructure. 20 to 30 critical vulnerabilities in their infrastructure. They have around 240,000 servers. Do the math. And you know that that's just way too much. Okay? So the SIM solution probably should help you, but it's really difficult to get the asset data quickly and understand the indicators of compromise. Oops, sorry, that was not my intention. That's it. And we try to close that gap by putting Skybox in the middle. And you see how it works in a second. So Skybox itself is a security solution. It's kind of a security suite. So we do have two large areas. So we are coming out of the vulnerability and threat management space. That's where we started in 2002, 2003. First product shipped 2004. So that's our core competence. We're not coming like some people and also our competitors always assume, we're not coming out of the security policy management corner, because that's something we added on top of it probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when customers said, you know this already, why don't you visualize it, okay? So we try to simplify your cybersecurity risk management. We try to integrate with the new attacks on your IT, cloud, and OT platform. Everyone knows what OT is. It's not the Internet of Things. It's the SCADA network, so it's where the power plants are, production plants, and stuff like this. So we cover this as well. Very complex area. We try to close the security gaps here by the point solutions. And how are we going to do this? So we have these 5 modules. We start with vulnerability control. So vulnerability control knows everything about your assets, okay? It absorbs the information from the other modules about the network, coming to this in a second. It also absorbs the information from your vulnerability scanners, from your penetration testing, from your asset management systems, from your CMDBs, from your SCCMs. So whatever gives us information about an asset is being absorbed into Skybox, being imported, okay? And it counts against the asset, and it counts against the criticality of this asset. Because we also use things like, where is that asset in my network? Is it something in the DMZ, or is it something in the core elements of what we call the treasury network, okay? Or is it something which is less important? It's just a desktop PC from the receptionist. So we know everything about this, okay? By having this information and by combining this information with the criticality and our own research about the vulnerabilities, we're pretty much in a good shape to give you an insight about the attack surface you have. And we're underlying this with the firewall assurance module, where we know everything about the access layer. I mean, knowing that there is a vulnerability not necessarily means that this vulnerability can be leveraged by an attacker, right? There might be a firewall in between. So why would you care about it in the first place? Why would you prioritize it, okay, in the highest rank? So you have to, but probably not in the highest rank. So with firewall assurance giving us the access layer, meaning we understand what traffic can go which way, we also have the network assurance model, which gives us all the routing information. So everything which is being on your Cisco devices or whatever you have, or your layer 3 switches, which are handling the packet on a routing plane, okay? Combining that, we know probably with vulnerability control, with firewall assurance, and with network assurance, we probably know everything about your network, which is enough for us to pin a network map, which is an interactive map. I mean, it's not just a nice GIF picture. It is something that you can query, and you will see later on how that works. Some people ask me, Carlos, how accurate is that map? So it is as accurate as probably every controller or every company like a KPMG, PwCs that come into your company and say, I need an actual network plan, and they would accept that because we can export that in certain formats like Visio, and it would look like an actual network plan. You would need to be compliant, like PCI DSS, NIST, FISMA, NERC, whatever there is, okay? And then we have the change manager, and by knowing everything about your infrastructure, also gives you the ability to follow the change process in your infrastructure. Because if someone changes something in your environment, you want to be aware of it, and you want to know who did what, when, why, okay? And you want to have a proper risk assessment. I'm going to talk about this later on. Because that a rule is compliant doesn't mean that that rule doesn't offer any risk, okay? So I'm going to talk about this later on. Horizon is a module which is basically a different visualization layer we have compared to the other GUIs we have, which shows you the trends in your network, the key indicators where something is going wrong. It is, I consider it more like an executive layer. It's not very deep technical, but it has some nice colors from green over orange to red. And it tells you exactly where you have to look at and what are the sweet spots in your network. Probably because of a weak configuration, probably because of a high volume of critical vulnerabilities, or whatever there is. So having said that, how does that work per module? So as I said, firewall assurance is there to get the information about the firewall configuration. So it puts them in, it reads them out from the management system, reads them from the firewall itself, or even an offline file import works here for us. And we can do the security assessment on that. So basically, we do the device hardening for you. We look into the configuration and we find things like, oh, there is DHCP turned on your external DMZ interface. Is that a very clever idea? Probably not. There is a vulnerable web service turned on your Cisco router. There is something going on with your admin password. It's too weak or it's not encrypted in the config file. So we find out stuff like this and show it to you. We also read the configuration of your policies, if that is in line with your company wishful thinking, how the configuration should look like and what traffic should flow where. How does it work in practical? So we collect the information, we normalize the information, which means every firewall vendor looks the same, okay? So you don't need to know the checkpoint icons, you don't need to know the panorama icons. It's all being normalized and it all looks the same. It's very easy to work with that. And we normalize it, we analyze it, as I said, we look into the configurations, we look into the policies, if they probably allow traffic from your business partner across your whole network to your internet perimeter on port 25. What would be the result? They could send out spam mail by your public IP address. So that's things we're looking into where we say, well, that's probably not a good idea to have on your network. And then once we know it, we report on it and we act on it. So we give you a nice report, or we can, by right mouse click, you can compare the configurations, or you can raise a ticket to change the configuration, stuff like this. So it's a very convenient to get your firewall in shape, right? So that it works in the way it's supposed to work, and that the policy set on the firewall is the most strongest one you can have. Also, we optimize it over time. So we look into the rules and we see the rule usage, okay? We see the object usage, and we then nimble that down to what you really need in your network. And you can eliminate over time. It's not a one-day job, okay? But you can eliminate over time. You can kick off from your configuration unused policies, shadow policies, redundant policies, unused object, all the stuff you probably don't want to have on your firewall. Apart from the security aspect, it also has a cost effect, right? I mean, a firewall with 10,000 rules on it, where you're only literally using 1,000, okay, is probably overwhelmed by searching the rule base. So you can clean up the firewall and free up performance and probably delay the buying of the next better hardware platform. Network assurance is basically doing the same but for network equipment. There are two different modules, okay? But network assurance is looking in your routers, it's looking in your load balancers, it's looking into your IPS systems, it gets the configuration, okay? We can connect your QIP and stuff like this and absorbs the information, put it in Skybox, add it to the model, do security analytics on it, like we tell you what kind of vulnerabilities on the OS you are currently using on your router, okay? And we do, of course, the network compliance verification by looking in the routing table if it allows traffic you don't want to have. Again, the same here. We collect, we normalize, we create the model, which means we create the network map once we have that information, because this is essential to build up the full network. And then we analyze in context with the whole network. And then, of course, we report on the actions you probably have to take. The next one is the change manager, probably the most interesting module we have, because some customers, they say, okay, I know everything about my firewall, I know everything about my policies, it's all in good shape, but I have some serious issues by tracking the changes. Because that's what you want to do, right? I mean, inside your company, you should have what we call a workflow consisting of different phases, where everyone knows in what phase he has to do and what not, which could be, by the way, how it works. It could be a request comes in. So someone says, I need access from A to B. Could be from internal to internal, from internal to external, whatever he just needs, okay? So we identify the path through the network because we know the network. So we know exactly, is that already in place? Is that access already being granted? Or do we need to modify the firewalls? Okay, so once we have that, we make a suggestion to you and say, okay, for that particular access request, there's 3 firewalls in the path, and you need to go on firewall number 1, and there's nothing to do because the access is already granted. On firewall number 2, there's the rule number 21. And if you add the source into a object into policy number 23, 24, 25, okay, it will grant the access. And then on firewall number 3, there's nothing in place, so you need to put a brand new policy before rule number 13. Okay, so we give you an advice where to put the rule and how to modify an existing rule set, that it really makes sense and you don't end up with the mess like unused rules, unused objects, and shadowed and redundant rules again. Once we have that, and that was one of the key features I hired with Skybox because I think that's one of the most awesome features we have. We do the risk assessment. Okay, risk assessment means we look into the rule, and we tell you, is that in line with your company policy? Is that open the possibility for your business partner to send spam mails across your network? Is that open a security hole from the developer's network, probably to an external FTP server? So where someone could come back and trace the route back because the FTP server is weak. So we do the risk assessment by telling you exactly that policy is not in line with the communication matrix the company wants you to follow. And it's not in line with the vulnerabilities you have. Because if you implement it, you probably open up your Oracle servers in the background to be exposed to the internet, and a hacker could break in because it has a lot of vulnerabilities. Once we have that and everyone ticked in the box, yeah, I agree on this, it's all good, or rejects it, whatever happens, we go to the implementation, which means we provision the rule on the firewall management system, okay? And it sits there and it waits for the next commit and confirm. Once it is on the firewall, we do the verification. Has the rule been implemented the same way it was being approved? Okay, not an unimportant point, right? I mean, so we compare this rule on the firewall against the ticket and say yes or no. So once we have all this, we do also the recertification, which means the rule is in place now, but the owner needs to recertify the rule, let's say after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, depends on what you set as a default. And then he gets a ticket and he needs to say, well, I need this rule for another 6 months, or no, I don't need it anymore. Okay, and we also can, of course, send the rule owner a rule usage report by saying, guy, I mean, you're not using that rule since 8 months right now. Are you really serious that you need it one more time? So vulnerability control, the most interesting module we have. So what we do is, again, we get all the information about the assets. I'm going to show you what kind of information you will get later on. So once we have the asset information, okay, we analyze this information and we compare it against stuff we have inside of Skybox, which is called the dictionary. What you see on the left side is the scanless assessment. Scanless assessment means we're not a scanner, okay? It's a vulnerability detector. By just comparing the given information about an asset, we can tell you that there must be that vulnerability. Well, that has a big advantage. Most companies, they only scan once a month, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks. So let's assume you scan on the 1st, okay? Everything is proper. Network is in a good shape, the servers are in a good shape, and then on the, let's say on the 5th or on the 10th, your administrator rolls out a new version of Skype on the desktops, or whatever kind of communicator you use. And then on the 15th, there's a vulnerability coming up for this. So someone could easily break in, right? Like you've seen with FaceTime on the iPhones in the past. It was very easy. So when do you recognize this? You recognize it during the next scan period, right? Probably on the next 1st, probably in 6 weeks, probably in 8 weeks. So what Skybox is doing, it downloads vulnerability information every night from a server. We call that the dictionary, okay? And it compares the current software you carry in your network against the countermeasurements you have, and it raises a vulnerability report scanless. And it tells you exactly, well, there's a vulnerability and it has this priority. Okay? 2 minutes, okay. So after the prioritization, we give you the remediation, okay? So remediation means we give you an advice how to solve the problem. So again, we've spoken about this. The only thing here about this slide is we integrate with over 120 vendors. So let's look a little bit deeper into technology, okay? So we call Skybox the single source of truth for SOCs and certs, okay? Because everything is in one hand. We break up the silos, okay? We absorb the information from the different vendors. We combine it. Never mind if it's a checkpoint, if it's a Palo Alto, if it's a Cisco router, if it is a, I don't know, tripwire, whatever you have, okay? We bring this into Skybox, and we have a single source of truth for all the information. That leads us to the network map, as I said in the beginning. Actively, we're also supporting the cloud environments, okay? AWS and Azure, whatever there is, NSX. So once we have this information, we can say, okay, from that public web server, there's an open path through the public cloud, and then you're on-premise, and someone can go into the development server. What does it mean? What do we know about this? So now we're looking into this development server. We know the path, okay, through the network. We know the vulnerabilities. We can prioritize because we know there is no firewall rule, no IPS signature, nothing protecting that particular server. So once we have that, we can give you all the asset information, which means in-depth asset information, basic asset data, tech data, business data, network context, vulnerability data. I don't need to read the right side for you. Vulnerability enrichment data, analytic and prioritization of the vulnerability. That is something you get from the asset and you can report on. And that allows you to have an educated guess how to prioritize the certain vulnerabilities you have in your network. This asset information then can also be enriched with something like location, zone, in which part of the network it resides. So how critical is it for me? What kind of data carries it? Who is the owner? Is that owner currently available? Stuff like this, or what we call the custom attributes. Okay? And that makes it for us very easy and very, very clear to support the SOC guys by easily, and I have many more slides behind this, so you can get this from the partner here. So to assign this to the SOC people and really take the correct and appropriate action by reading that information and then know, okay, I can prevent that one. I can secure the whole zone with 150 servers just by deploying that particular IPS signature or by just modifying that particular access rule on the firewall. I can block that. We have one more thing I want to talk about, and then I'm done. And that's, we have two models actually in Skybox. One is what we call the live model, and the other one is the what-if model. So if you're not certain what to do, if you're really insecure how you should handle this, you can take the live model, you can copy it into a what-if model, and you can play with it, and you can change the configuration. You can change the server, you can change the firewalls, you can change the routers, you can change the IPS signatures in our model, and then you run the attack simulation one more time, and you see if that attack is being stopped or not. So I call this to avoid the headless chicken syndrome. So most likely when people are under attack, they start changing everything on the network. So the IT department is doing something completely different than the SOC department, than the firewall department. And here you can play around, you can look what is the reaction of the network to that change. And then once you're confident you're doing the right thing, you can compare the two models, like the live and the what if. You see the changes you did, and then you can roll them out and make sure you do the right thing rather than to break up in chaos.